Stanford University.
Christopher asked me to share some highlights of 25 years. I wanted to start by just saying, you know, when you become a food entrepreneur, you're really touching something very special. It's really about passion and love and transformation. When people take something and put it in their mouth and digest it, their whole life changes. So you have to take it very seriously. It's a very different kind of entrepreneurship than a lot of others. So let's see, that didn't work. Can you want to put it back? Yeah. If I hit that, it switches it back to. Anyway, I'll just tell you. 25 years ago, I was. 25 years ago, I was producing a new conference. It was called Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Have you ever heard of that, TED? One of the things as an entrepreneur that you'll appreciate is you come to it with actually no formal training or permission or credentials, and you just sort of make it up as you go. Well, TED is interesting. I got invited to another new conference from a group called the Social Venture Network, and at that conference I met a lot of really remarkable people. I was in my late 20s. In one weekend I met Ben and Jerry. Let's see, I met, yeah, it's working now. Okay. I met Ben and Jerry, I met Amory Lovins, I met Paul Hawken, I met Jeff Hollander, I met a lot of very interesting people who were about to change the world. And I left the conference, headed to the airport in a car, got on a plane from New Jersey back to San Francisco, sat next to another fellow traveler from the conference in the back row of a very old DC-9. And somewhere over Philadelphia, the flight attendant came and offered us both coffee, and we said, no, can we have tea? That was sort of interesting that two people wanted tea, and we put the tea to our lips, and it was terrible. And it provoked a 6-hour conversation across the country. How come you can't get a decent cup of tea in the United States? What's wrong with this place? It's the most popular beverage in the world. It's a spiritual tradition in Japan. In China, it's a drink of longevity and happiness. So we went on, and by the time we landed, about 6 hours later, I said, I'm going to form a tea company. And my seatmate said, I've got a perfect name for that, the Republic of Tea. And I said, I'll be the Minister of Progress. I went home and I told my wife, who was holding our 1-year-old, that I was going to start a tea company, and she almost dropped the baby on the floor. I'll never forget that. Anyway, Mel Ziegler and I started writing faxes. Does anybody remember what those things were? Back and forth. We exchanged about 600 pages of faxes in 8 weeks. Those faxes became a book. And in that book, I was looking at it, I asked him a question. I said, when is the right time to start a business? And he, in his utmost clarity, answered to me, never and always. So that's sort of the message I want to leave you with. There's never a perfect time, and there's never a bad time to start a business. But that book actually was very interesting. The advance from that book actually funded the Republic of Tea. And the Republic of Tea still exists today. It grew very, very quickly. It really kind of created the specialty tea category. The book was sort of, it's a culmination of all our letters. It kind of wrote itself. But when you read it, it's interesting. There were a lot of great marketing ideas and ways to bring the product to market, but about halfway through this process, I realized I didn't know enough about tea to really create a company. Also, we got the offer to publish the book just when we had these letters. Doubleday said, oh, I'd love to publish this book, and Mel said, well, I don't think we should publish a book about how to start a business if we don't have a business. I said, you know, small detail. But anyway, it took me 2 years to figure out how to start the Republic of Tea. I had to take another job in between. I had to go to London, and I apprenticed with a man who'd been in the tea business for 25 years. He'd had 3 sons just about my age, and none of them wanted to go into the tea business. And when I showed up and said, I'm going to change the way the United States thinks about tea, he sort of smirked and then took me under his wing and taught me everything I knew about tea, and actually gave me access to his products. Following the sort of growth of the Republic of Tea, it entered the world, you know, with this ethos of sip by sip rather than gulp by gulp, but then ironically was pursued by a bunch of big companies, including the biggest coffee companies and tea companies, and it was sold in an auction, and it was a momentous event in my life, somewhat bittersweet, unfortunately. But I learned a lot, and at that point I was recruited by some other friends who I'd met at the Social Venture Network to join a company called Odwalla, which was a small juice company. We were about 15 million in sales, and I was there when we grew to 90 million, and 2 highlights stand out. One was when we had an E. coli crisis, and we lost a little 1-year-old who was the same age as my daughter. And another was I met a man named Bill Hambrecht, who was a legendary investment banker and venture capitalist who'd taken companies like Apple and Adobe and Genentech public. And he took Odwalla public, and I got to watch and participate in this amazing experience. We also learned a lot about the role of culture. Anyway, following Odwalla, Bill Hambrecht actually asked me if I would lead his wine group. He owned 6 wineries and 600 acres of vineyards, but I said, I don't know anything about wine. And he said, well, why don't you go learn? So he sent me to France for 6 weeks, and I came back, and he made me his partner in this wine business, and that grew very quickly. And then as I started to work with him, I was watching how people back other entrepreneurs, and I set up a small fund with Bill Hambrecht, and the first investment we made was in Stonyfield Farms, which then was sold to Danone about 18 months later. That's how I got into venture capital. During that time, in the early 2000s, I was really interested in how functional ingredients might provide healthy pathways for food and displace some of the pharmaceutical products. So I started something called Brand New Brands. It was a functional food incubator with a venture capital model. This was before the word, you know, incubator and accelerator was was ubiquitous. I won't go into that. That led, one of the investors in Brand New Brands was Unilever, a small multinational food company. And they came to me and said, wow, this is really interesting. You were able to create 4 companies in 18 months, each with its own team and brand and product on the shelf for about $1 million a piece. And we spent more than that with McKinsey to figure out whether or not we should go into functional foods. So they asked me to set up a venture capital practice for them, and they said, we don't want it to be captive. We want it to be open in the marketplace. Why don't you go out and write a thesis and see if you can attract the capital, and we'll be your anchor investor. Anyway, we created something called Physic Ventures back in 2000, 2007, 2008. We raised $160 million, Unilever, PepsiCo, Humana, CalSTRS, CalPERS, Rudolf Steiner Foundation, a whole bunch of institutional LPs, and we set out to invest in consumer-facing health, well-being, and sustainable living. This would probably be called impact investing now, but we didn't call it that for a lot of reasons, which I'll talk about this afternoon. Now we're talking, you know, about the burden of disease. You've heard a lot about it today. I'm not going to go into it, but I want to talk to you a little bit about opportunity, and I'm going to need a few minutes to tell you about some opportunities that are available to you and your colleagues that I'm working on right now. We live in a taste-driven culture, so at the front of all food entrepreneurship has to be taste. And you know, as Arlen's showing lab-made meat, it's only going to be as good as really the taste, so don't forget that. We're also seeing that the nutritionist is playing an increasing role. The grower, the physician, a public health dynamic, you know, people, whether it's urban planning and space or epidemiology, and of course technologists are playing an increasingly important role, and then behavioral science is also playing a role. So I just wanted to show you this to see that this kind of gathering is so critical for food entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship happens at the convergence of disparate sectors where people who aren't used to talking to each other get together. I just wanted to show really quickly a couple things that have been highlights for me. That book also led me into a whole academic career. I was the first professor of social entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley. And one of the companies that we created out of my class was called Good Guide, which Physic later invested in. It was started by Dara O'Rourke. It's now owned by Underwriters Laboratory. These are two of my favorite people. We wrote the business plan for Revolution Foods. This is Kirsten Toby and Kristen Richmond, who are kind of famous now in food circles, serving over 1 million healthy lunches a year. And I mean, a week, I'm sorry. And of course, this is one of Physic's latest investments, Yumly. We led the Series A in this. Brian Whitland's going to be here on a panel with me this afternoon. I think Dave Feller's here. If you haven't seen, this is a food discovery and shopping site that's really out to revolutionize the kitchen. Christopher asked me to also, you know, think about and share with you opportunities now in food entrepreneurship. And as it happens, I'm working on 3 things where I need partners and colleagues. So if any of these are interesting to you or people that you know, please get in touch with me. One is, I've been approached by the leading culinary school in the world that's global to start a school of food entrepreneurship. And it'll be both online and offline. And I'm building a team for this right now, and I'm really looking for an young entrepreneurial co-founder lead to do this with me. One of the things I didn't get a chance to mention, but you could see it as a theme in my career, is the importance of mentorship and apprenticeship. So this is a really remarkable opportunity for the right person, and it's now. Another one is I'm in the throes of starting a new institute about food and aging. I'm working with someone named Jeff Drummond, who's probably the most legendary PBS television producer of cooking shows. He produced Julia Child's program and Jacques Pepin, and I mean, he's amazing. He and I are starting an institute and innovation platform to really focus on the issues around food and aging. That's also going to be paid, and it's now. And the third is I'm involved with something called the Vitality Commission on the Promotion of Health and the Prevention of Chronic Diseases. And it has a very strong food component in it. We're doing a lot of sort of seminal evidence-based research, and we're working to intervene in the system to shift policy and the prioritization of prevention as a theme. There's opportunities for project associates for this, so if you're interested in that, please get in touch with me. One parting thought about food entrepreneurship: it takes 15 years to become an overnight success. Here's my contact information. I look forward to hearing from you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.